Tragedy in Colombia. Dozens of Brazilian soccer players die in a plane crash. Pro-life pick. President-elect Donald Trump taps a leading critic of Obamacare for Health and Human Services Secretary. Castro's farewell. What his death means for religious liberty in Cuba. And Vatican Christmas preps. The story behind the nativity scene now being built in St. Peter's Square. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, November 29th, 2016. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. Rescue crews say 6 people survived a plane crash in Colombia. 71 died, including members of a Brazilian soccer team. As recovery work continues, the investigation is progressing tonight. Wreckage from the plane crash shows why it's such a challenge for rescuers. The mid-sized passenger jet went down in a mountainous area outside of Medellin, Colombia. Poor weather also hampered the initial response.
De la Aeronáutica Civil de Bolivia, con quien compartimos un documento en el cual
the pilot sent an emergency message just before the crash reporting an electrical problem. But a flight attendant who survived said the plane actually ran out of fuel. Now investigators will determine what really happened. The plane was carrying soccer players from Chapecoense in southern Brazil. The team was lesser known, but had just started to find success and a greater following. They were on their way to Colombia to play in the South American Cup Finals, with the first of 2 games set for tomorrow. Tributes from around the world have begun pouring in.
They have our solidarity. So do their families, their friends, their countries. It's sad and regretful.
Investigators now say they have found both of the plane's black boxes in perfect condition. That could help determine what caused that tragic crash. A fast-moving wildfire kills 3 people in Tennessee, burns hundreds of homes, and forces thousands of tourists to evacuate. This fire swept through the area near the Dollywood theme park in Pigeon Forge. Winds approaching 90 miles an hour fanned the flames as volunteer firefighters battled to control this fire. Hundreds of homes and other buildings, including a 16-story hotel, are damaged or destroyed.
As we were coming back from the grocery store, the smoke was just oppressive. And as we got closer to where we knew sort of the area of our cabin was, we realized that that mountain was on fire. I mean, not even just that orange glow, but watching it burn.
Officials haven't said where the 3 victims died. Others were taken to hospitals, including some with burns. National Guard troops have been called in to help. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. A refugee from Pakistan who moved to the U.S. 2 years ago is now accused of an attack on one of the nation's largest college campuses. Federal investigators say the suspect railed against the U.S. on social media, and tonight there are widespread reports ISIS is claiming responsibility. Wyatt Goolsby has more for us tonight.
Brian, investigators still seek a motive for the attack on the campus of Ohio State University, but the suspect's Facebook page may be a clue. In it, he says if the U.S. wants Muslims to stop carrying out lone wolf attacks, then they must make peace with ISIS.
Investigators say they know the who in Monday's violent car and knife attack, which injured 11 people. Abdul Razak Ali Artan, an Ohio State University student of Somali descent.
The suspect drove his vehicle into a group of pedestrians. There were some injuries that resulted from that. The suspect then got out of the vehicle with a knife and began cutting individuals in the area.
It took a while to realize that he had a knife and that it wasn't just a regular car accident. And once everyone realized that, everyone scattered.
The question is why. Investigators have been looking at social media posts and also an address where the suspect lived. Officials say Artan talked about being tired of U.S. interference in Muslim communities. Local Muslim leaders have been quick to condemn the attack.
They don't speak for us, they don't speak to our faith, and so we strongly condemn in the strongest terms any act of violence that's done in our faith.
The university says it will hold a vigil on campus tonight. Many say they are thankful for the campus police officer who fatally shot Artan right after the attack. Classes resumed on campus today, but officials say 4 of the victims are still in the hospital.
You frankly took a piece out of everybody here at our beautiful Ohio State University that this could have happened here. But we are a strong, tough, resilient community.
Terrorist groups like
resilient
ISIS have encouraged individuals to carry out lone wolf attacks in Western countries. In an online magazine, ISIS even mentioned using knives and vehicles. Investigators say one of Artan's social media accounts warned about other Muslims who are part of a sleeper cell waiting for a signal. Brian.
Thank you, White. And there is a resemblance to last July's terror attack in Nice, France, where a vehicle was used as a weapon. Robin Simcox is terrorism and national security analyst with the Heritage Foundation. It would seem that these attacks are almost impossible to stop. Are we likely to see more?
Well, absolutely. How do you begin to stop a radicalized individual who is determined to carry out an attack when he just requires a car and a knife to carry out that atrocity? This is the problem that police and law enforcement intelligence agencies face every day. These radicalized individuals, easy access to weapons and willing to kill.
Is there any way to control this radicalization propaganda that's inspiring this stuff?
I think it's very hard. The government does all it can, or perhaps it could do more, but it's done something in terms of trying to take the content offline. Some of the media platforms have tried to take off some of ISIS's extremist propaganda as well. But this stuff gets out so quickly and so easily, can pass so quickly between radicalized individuals and people on the verge of being radicalized. And then they take inspiration from previous attacks that you see around the world, and we've seen a lot in Europe, especially recently. And then that gives them the inspiration to attack themselves. Very, very hard to stop.
This is a global issue. Do you think there's enough cooperation between intelligence and law enforcement between Europe and the U.S.?
Well, I think the cooperation's got better, but part of the problem is there's not even that much cooperation within Europe itself. For example, domestic agencies in Belgium or France, the police don't talk to their foreign intelligence guys, they don't share information internally, so they then can't share that information externally with their allies like the United States. So there's a lot of improvement that needs to take place in the intelligence realm, but we also have to accept as a society these kind of attacks are very difficult to stop. They're very simple, using everyday items like knives, like cars, and this is going to be the new normal, these kind of attacks for years to come.
Is there any way for the U.S. to be more proactive against these terror threats?
Well, I think there's absolutely no doubt that the U.S. needs to dismantle this so-called caliphate that's been created in Iraq and Syria. This cannot be allowed to stand that ISIS controls this territory and is used as an inspiration for aspiring terrorists all around the world. Of course, it needs to do much more on the intelligence front as well as the ideological component. This is a multi-pronged war, and it's going to take generations possibly for us to win it.
From what you have seen and heard so far of the transition, how do you think President-elect Trump will approach this terror threat?
Well, I think that the main thing that President-elect Trump has talked about that would differentiate him from the current administration is working hand in hand with Russia in Syria to try and defeat ISIS. Now, the problem with this is Russia is playing a very two-pronged game, at least on this, and it's more interested in defeating the rebel groups that threaten its partner Bashar al-Assad in Syria, and it's not always prioritized fighting ISIS. So President-elect Trump may have some difficulties getting the Russians on side on that front.
Challenges ahead. Robin Simcox, the Heritage Foundation, thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Donald Trump makes a bold choice, nominating pro-life Georgia Representative Tom Price for Secretary of Health and Human Services. Chief White House correspondent and political director Lauren Ashburn has more tonight.
Brian, Tom Price is an orthopedic surgeon and a six-term congressman. The 62-year-old has been pushing to repeal Obamacare since its inception. Georgia Representative Tom Price will wield great power as Donald Trump's top health policy advisor. He wrote a bill in 2010 detailing plans to dismantle Obamacare.
Article after article, people are reviewing it and saying Obamacare is absolutely imploding, and that's why we need to repeal and replace Obamacare. So Dr. Tom Price, chairman of the House Budget Committee, also member of Ways and Means, every cycle for the last several cycles introduced very solid replacement health care option bills, and that's one of the things he's going to lead the charge on as far as the Secretary of HHS.
Price is known in Georgia as a rising Republican who was rumored to be weighing a run for governor in 2018. His appointment lit up Twitter, the hashtag repeal and replace, and Newt Gingrich calls Price the right leader. Democrats accused him of taking insurance from millions of poor, and former VP candidate Tim Kaine used the hashtag coverage matters. Price's 2010 Empowering Patients First bill lays out specifics to roll back Obamacare, including plans for age-based tax credits. The White House wouldn't comment on Price's proposal.
It will be his job to implement the president's plan, not his own. And we'll see if Trump care measures up.
Price, like his boss, also wants federal funding to be withdrawn from Planned Parenthood.
He is 100% pro-life. He led the charge to defund Planned Parenthood through the budget reconciliation process. He is setting the stage for President-elect Trump and a pro-life Congress to reallocate those dollars to providers of truly comprehensive women's health care.
Price's new position will also put him atop the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the Food and Drug Administration, and the National Institutes for Health.
Thank you, Lauren Ashburn. And Trump also makes his pick for Transportation Secretary. Elaine Chao previously served as Labor Secretary under President George W. Bush. She is married to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. He says he plans to vote on her nomination, which of course appears to be a conflict of interest. Trump and Mitt Romney meet again tonight for dinner. The president-elect is said to be strongly considering the former governor to be the next Secretary of State, despite strong objections from some in his own party and his own advisors. Newt Gingrich is quoted as saying Romney is part of the swamp that Trump has promised to drain. The Attorney General nominee meets with the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Chuck Grassley calls Jeff Sessions an honorable man and a person of integrity. Grassley says he intends to hold hearings before Trump's inauguration to vote on and approve Sessions' nomination. Donald Trump is going on tour to thank voters. Sources say he'll visit several states that helped him win the election, the first stop in Cincinnati this Thursday. He'll be joined there by Vice President Mike Pence. The president-elect voices strong feelings against people who burn the American flag. Trump took to Twitter saying, quote, "Nobody should be allowed to burn the American flag. If they do, there must be consequences, perhaps loss of citizenship or a year in jail." The Supreme Court ruled in 1969 that flag burning is protected under the First Amendment. House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy says there are no plans for congressional action against flag burning. Well, the lame duck session of Congress embarks on its final work of 2016. Lawmakers are already anticipating a new president and a Republican-controlled Congress in 2017. Our Capitol Hill reporter Jason Calvi gives us a snapshot of what's on their agenda. Jason?
Brian, Congress faces a December 9th funding deadline to keep the federal government open to stop a government shutdown. Republican leadership, including the president-elect, are looking for this budget deal to be short-term, to last through about the end of March. This will then give the then President Trump, the opportunity to weigh in on all the agencies the budgets and all the agencies that he will oversee as president. Congress is also looking at funding for Flint and some of these other communities that have been devastated by lead-tainted water. They're looking at a bill that will fund about $220 million to these communities. And Republican leadership has promised that this will be done in the lame duck. Another thing they're looking at is the 21st Century Cures Act, which pumps billions of dollars into research against cancer and other things like that at the National Institutes of Health. But the big question here at the Capitol is, what is the future of Obamacare in 2017? Brian?
So, Jason, how exactly are Republicans planning to repeal Obamacare?
Using the same method that they used 1 year ago. They used something called reconciliation. Usually in the Senate, a bill needs 60 votes to pass, but using reconciliation, they can pass it with just a simple majority. And they did use that last year to defund Planned Parenthood and to repeal Obamacare. President Obama did veto it. But I did ask the House Majority Leader, will they be tacking on defunding of Planned Parenthood to this repeal of Obamacare next session starting in around January? His answer, he really didn't give one. He said, wait and see.
Jason Calvi at the U.S. Capitol. Thank you, Jason. Coming up, Cubans remember Fidel Castro and what could change now that he's gone. And the First Lady invites military families to enjoy the White House for the holidays. On this Tuesday evening, the 29th of November, thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. Schools and government offices remain closed today as Cubans pay tribute to their former leader, Fidel Castro. Long lines streamed into Revolution Plaza in Havana today. This is the second day of mourning in the communist island nation. Castro died Friday at age 90. President Raul Castro pays tribute to his older brother Fidel. He and other Cuban government leaders observed a moment of silence in front of the late dictator's ashes. That urn begins a 3-day procession tomorrow, retracing the march of Castro's army from the Sierra Maestra Mountains to the capital city. The White House says a high-ranking presidential advisor and the top diplomat to Cuba will attend Fidel Castro's funeral. Press Secretary Josh Earnest insists the two are not part of a formal delegation. He says sending Deputy National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes and Jeffrey De Laurentiis shows a commitment to, quote, an ongoing, future-oriented relationship with the Cuban people. Christina Arriaga is Executive Director of the Beckett Fund for Religious Liberty. Christina, do you think it's appropriate for the U.S. to send these two high-ranking officials?
Oh, absolutely not. This is honoring the legacy of a man who executed, murdered, incarcerated, and tortured more people percentage-wise than Stalin did himself. This is a man who has tortured and killed priests and pastors and rabbis and has never respected human rights. The only person that should be sent to Cuba, frankly, is someone to make sure he's really dead.
Fidel Castro had an impact on your own family.
Fidel Castro is like the Freddy Krueger nightmare for every single Cuban that had to flee Cuba. He dictated everything that Cubans do, what Cubans eat, what Cubans read, and what Cubans see on television. Everything was nationalized after he took over. The Castro brothers stole from the Cuban people $600 to $800 million, repressed them, starved them to death, and absolutely he should go into history as a man that did the same committed the same atrocities as Hitler himself.
Have the Cuban people seen any relief in the area of religious freedom under Raul Castro?
Unfortunately not. Fidel Castro is dead, but the Castro regime is not. In fact, as his body was being prepared to be cremated, the Castro secret police was arresting human rights activists and dissidents because they feared that they would take to the streets. In the last 2 years alone, over 300 houses of worship have been leveled, pastors have been sent to prison, and crosses have been desecrated.
So why do you think these world leaders, including some from democracies, are making pretty positive statements about Fidel Castro?
Because Fidel Castro was the king of deceit. And unfortunately, a lot of people played into it, including our own Barbara Walters in 1977, interviewed Fidel Castro, and the world began to fall in love with this romanticized version. But that really is condescending to the Cuban people who have suffered 55 years without a free election.
So what is next for the people of Cuba? Will they finally see, these next generations, will they see any improvement?
Well, this next generation is born without Fidel, and that is a positive thing. But I think what happens in the next 9 days during this period of mourning will say a lot about what happens in the next 20 years in Cuba. If people do not take to the streets and do not demand a peaceful transition, I don't know what will happen to the people of Cuba.
Do you think they have the heart to do that as the people of Poland did so many years ago?
Absolutely, I think they do. Freedom is a strong call. We're born with that thirst to find the truth. We're born with that truth-seeking instinct. And I think the Cuban people display this. Many Cubans have gone to jail in the last 55 years, Cubans that were born in the revolution. And I think there are a lot of heroes in the people of Cuba.
Well, you're one of my heroes, and I appreciate you being here tonight. Thank you, Christina.
Thank you.
Christina Arriaga, the Beckett Fund for Religious Liberty. Well, the president of South Korea offers to resign if Parliament develops a plan for a peaceful transfer of power. President Park Geun-hye is at the center of a corruption scandal. She is accused of conspiring with a close friend who is now in prison for fraud and other crimes. Hundreds of thousands of people have protested in Seoul in recent weeks, demanding her resignation. Iraqi forces take back 2 more villages from ISIS. This is part of a wider offensive near Mosul to regain control of Iraq's second largest city. The terror group first took control of Mosul and surrounding villages in 2014. It is the terror group's last major urban center in Iraq. Military families visit the White House today for a private viewing of Christmas decorations there. The families are hosted by First Lady Michelle Obama. This is part of the Joining Forces initiative. Children played games and with the Obama's dogs, Bo and Sonny. The First Lady says meeting with military families is one of her favorite holiday traditions.
It reminds us that between all the shopping lists and the travel plans and all those big meals, that we cannot forget what the holidays are really about, and you all help us.
Guests included service members, veterans, wounded warriors, along with their spouses and children. Keeping with tradition, several of the White House decorations honor military families. Up next, Christmas at the Vatican. A look at the Holy Father's Advent schedule and the special ornaments decorating the Vatican Christmas tree. And we'll meet Emma Morano, believed to be the last surviving person from the 1800s. Thank you for joining us this Tuesday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. Pope Francis reflects on God revealing himself to the humble. During morning mass at his residence, Francis said the humble and childlike are more likely to experience God's presence than the wise. The Pope says the Christmas story, in which most of the key figures are humble, is an example of this. Mary Shevlin joining us from Rome tonight. Mary, the schedule for Advent and Christmas for the Holy Father is out. What are the highlights?
Well, first of all, Brian, this Friday, the Holy Father will attend an Advent reflection with the papal preacher, Father Cantalamessa, and he'll do that with all the heads of the Curia offices, the Vatican offices, and popes do that every year during Advent, so we'll kick off with that. We'll also have the inauguration of the Vatican Christmas tree and the Vatican nativity scene on December 9th. The tree is behind me, as you can see, but we're able to get some footage of it arriving in St. Peter's Square as the workers were beginning to set it up, along with the manger scene, which is always out in St. Peter's Square. Then on December 12th, the Holy Father will celebrate the Mass for Our Lady of Guadalupe. And what's interesting about that is they're going to have some liturgical hymns in those indigenous languages around the time when Our Lady of Guadalupe appeared. So that's going to be very interesting. And then, of course, we have the traditional midnight Mass here in the Vatican, followed the next day by the Pope's traditional Urbi et Orbi blessing, a blessing which extends to the city and to the whole world.
And Mary, give us the story behind the nativity scene there in St. Peter's Square.
What's going to be interesting this year, that's coming from the island of Malta, and all of the figures will be dressed in traditional Maltese dress. But it'll also reflect an important theme close to the heart of Pope Francis, and that is migration. So there will be a traditional Maltese fishing boat, but it's also meant to reflect and make us all reflect on the 3,000 lives alone that were lost in the Mediterranean Sea this year, those fleeing war and persecution in search of a better life. So not only the beauty of a traditional nativity scene, but a wonderful message as well.
And what is significant about the Vatican Christmas tree?
Well, besides it being 82 feet tall and a red spruce from northern Italy, it will be unveiled on December 9th, as I said before. And we want to take a good look when it is unveiled at the beautiful ceramic ornaments, which will be adorning it this year. As in years past, they're going to be made by hand by some sick children in hospitals all throughout Italy who are receiving cancer treatments and are suffering also as well from other illnesses. So another beautiful story attached to the Vatican nativity scene this year for Christmas.
Thank you, Mary Shevlin in Rome.
Thank you, Brian.
And the world's oldest living person celebrates her 117th birthday. Emma Morano, her two nieces, caregivers and doctors, joined the celebration in Italy. She credits her longevity to a diet of raw eggs and her doting family. Morano is believed to be the world's last surviving person who was born in the 1800s. Well, starting tomorrow, Lauren Ashburn takes over as anchor. I am honored, humbled, and grateful to have served Mother Angelica's mission. May she rest in peace. Until we meet again, for the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. Good night. God bless you.